and I think it's an issue that has to be taken seriously going forward.
Now call Deputy Tommy Broughan, 10 minutes.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. And first of all, I mean, I'd like to join with the Minister in expressing solidarity with the nearly 300,000 people who are without electricity tonight, and also with the emergency services who are desperately trying to reach them and to restore it. I think, obviously, the thoughts of all Irish citizens has gone out to the embattled households who have struggled against flooding over the last month or so, in particular, especially in Cork City and in the Cork coastal districts, in Limerick and the Shannon Basin, in the coastal areas of Connemara, in Mayo, Clare, and indeed in the Minister's own area in South East Leinster. And the flooding, of course, of recent weeks does highlight the need for major national funding for flood protection and prevention works over the medium and long term. In fact, Minister, we should be thinking in terms of 2030, 2050 in this regard, in relation to protection of coasts and also in relation to the management of flood river basins. Citizens also deserve, Cathaoirleach, full, open and transparent information about floodplains and the hydrology of homes and districts that they may choose to live in. And indeed, the developer-led construction that we had in the 1990s and in the 2000s, of course, the issues about hydrology were often the last thing on people's minds. Indeed, my own area of Dublin Bay North, in the North Fringe, we had huge high-density development being proposed there in an area that was very close to a very sensitive hydrological area, and which, in hydrological terms, I think was the high density was totally unjustified. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight on this important issue, Cathaoirleach, and I also want to welcome the reported 95 million total funding now to be allocated through the Department of Environment, Community and Local Government to repair the damage caused by the recent bad weather. However, I am concerned this may not be enough. I mean, the last Minister who spoke, Minister Keogh, said he thanked everybody because we weren't in the opposition blaming the government for the bad weather. But we can blame the government. We can blame the government because it has cut the budget of the OPW in relation to the flood risk management budget. It cut it, for example, by 11% between 2012 and 2013, and it was marginally even cut once again last year. Now, this government knew coming into office, we'd seen the disaster in 2009 in many areas when Cork City was nearly drowned. We saw disasters in Dublin City, another deputy referred to, in 2011 and 2012, and yet 2010 and 2011 rather, and yet that key budget in OPW was cut once again. So while funding now is welcome, I still think Ministers Hayes and Hogan, they've serious questions to answer in this regard, knowing, as we know, and what has been achieved in terms of priorities in government, that flood defences and flood risk management has to be one of the key issues. So I welcome the recent comments of OPW to the local authorities in relation to the necessary additional funding, which is going to be put forward now, hopefully, to begin the repair of the serious damage that has been done. But we do need to focus efforts, I think, on managing future significant flooding across the country, including in my own constituency in Dublin Bay North. Professor John Sweeney of NUI Maynooth, I think, has spoken very cogently over recent weeks of the confluence of high winds, rising sea levels, low pressure and heavy rain, which are set to become more frequent, with a consequent increasing number of significant flooding events of the kind we've experienced in recent weeks. I notice Professor Sweeney, of course, has called for efforts to reduce greenhouse gases, and of course it's astonishing that the Climate Change Bill, Minister, hasn't still been enacted, and you've been in power now for 3 years, and that important contribution to this whole issue hasn't been placed on a statutory basis. Engineers Ireland recently published the State of Ireland 2014 review of our infrastructure, and it's very striking again. This organisation of engineers, which represents 24,000 of the professionals, listed a series of deficiencies in flood prediction and prevention and downgraded the government's response to a D grade from a C grade last year. They also issued a list of important recommendations which I believe we should urgently begin to implement. I've seen in the past in my own constituency of Dublin Bay North, then Dublin North East, in the Baldoyle area in particular, Cathaoirleach, what significant funding, what impact good significant funding can have on flooding. Baldoyle parish, a significant part of it is a polder, and my first years in this house with yourself, Cathaoirleach, we had a flooding disaster, annual flooding disasters in which a child, a young teenager was killed, and then we began a campaign, the Abbey Park and District residents and the Baldoyle Community Association, to get the funding necessary, and to be fair to the governments at the time, we secured that funding, and since then, of course, the situation in Baldoyle has been greatly alleviated, and the annual flooding of the Moyne River and the Grange stream doesn't happen anymore. So that shows you if a government is committed and is prepared to spend the money, you can achieve success. I'd like to refer in particular now in my newly expanded constituency to the River Nanican flood relief project, where urgent financial support for hydrological analysis and remedial works are critically necessary. This river, the Nanican, it runs from Santry for just over 6 kilometres until it discharges into Dublin Bay behind the North Bull Island, through St Anne's in fact, and it's pipeless except for a small section in St Anne's. Our new city manager, Owen Keegan, recently provided me with a very detailed up-to-date report on the project, including maintenance and construction work that's been completed by Dublin City Council to date. He noted that there have been 3 major flood events in Dublin over recent years, with a number of smaller incidents, which the previous deputy referred to. And he also listed a large swathe of the Ardley Road, Ardmore, Brookwood, Hazelwood and Kilmore Road, James Larkin Road, Maryfield Crescent and Avenue area of Artane, which has suffered greatly from the flooding of the Nanican. Regular maintenance work, of course, is carried out by Dublin City Council, but really the City Council needs support for a full hydrological study, which will cost about €40,000, and then it needs many multiples of €40,000 to carry out the necessary works. And I know that Manager Keegan has put that case to the OPW and to Minister Hogan and Minister Hayes, and I hope it's something that government deputies for Dublin Bay North will try and ensure that funding comes forward for the Nanican, because again it could lead over the next few years to very serious flooding of a large part of Dublin Bay North. Another related and critically needed project, Cathaoirleach, has taken place in Clontarf. Since February 2013, a joint working group of Dublin City Council, the Clontarf Business Association and the Clontarf Residents Association have met on 9 occasions to try and agree on a strategy for the development of Clontarf Promenade, including full alleviation measures, and to try and ensure that the kind of major flood that happened 3 years ago doesn't affect the historic and beautiful Clontarf district. At this point, according to a recent update provided again by Dublin City Council, the joint working group has agreed that a flood defence is required at Clontarf, but that the visual impact of such a defence should be minimised to protect the environment of the Clontarf promenade. It's been suggested that a dual defence comprising the existing seawall and a secondary defence as close as possible to Clontarf Road should be advanced, as this would minimise the potential visual impact of introducing further seawall and flood defences. The recent report to Dublin City Council has also cautioned that other options to protect certain higher risk areas of the promenade from flooding require a full scheme to be developed, agreed, and a funding stream for it secured. And this is another project, I think, in Dublin Bay North, which hopefully this government, Ministers Hayes and Hogan, who of course may not be too much longer in their departments, if they secure perhaps some of their ambitions, but that the funding stream should be put in place for the Clontarf project as well. I want to commend the Clontarf Residents Association, the Clontarf Business Association and indeed Dublin City Council for engaging in the joint working group and advancing the project. I note this morning and other days that waves, of course, are being swept over the wall at Clontarf Linear Park Walkway, and Dublin City Council and local residents, of course, must be commended for the large sandbag defence measures in place since the Christmas period. Of course, agreed key works necessary to ensure safe flood defences at Clontarf must go ahead as soon as possible. There's also in Dublin Bay North, Cathaoirleach, a flood alleviation scheme ongoing on the Wad River Clanmoyle scheme near Clontarf Golf Club, and I understand from a recent report that a number of meetings have been held with relevant stakeholders and that various legal and financial obstacles are still being overcome, but sufficient of these have been resolved to continue the site works. But obviously this is a third project in my own constituency which will need strong support from government. As I said at the outset, I think the thoughts of all citizens are with our our fellow citizens tonight in the areas which are stricken by this incredible weather. I think all of us expect, I noticed a leader in the neighbouring jurisdiction said that whatever funding is required will be provided to remediate and repair the damage caused by flooding in the UK, and perhaps that's the kind of template that we need in this country as well, that whatever funding is required will be provided for these households, and that we'll have a vision and I think a system of financial support for the 2030s and longer to alleviate this horrendous problem for so many households. Thanks, Karen.
The Deputy Noel Harrington, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Lascion Corlin. I'm very pleased to be able to speak on